The evening shift at Kensington Palace had always carried a certain weight, but tonight it felt different. Have you ever felt like something wasn't quite right, even when everything seemed fine? That's exactly what Thomas Bennett felt as he walked the quiet, dimly lit halls of the palace. It was an unease that crept up slowly, a sense of something dark and unknown just beyond his reach. And tonight, in the shadowed corridors of Kensington Palace, that something was about to change everything. Without a second thought, Thomas stepped away from his post, his boots clinking softly on the stone floor. Every step he took away from the safe familiarity of his station felt like an act of defiance, like a betrayal of the rules that had been instilled in him for years. Yet there was no turning back. The sound of the child's voice, filled with innocence and fear, had already woven its way into his very core. He couldn't leave him there alone in the dark. Not now, not like this. As he moved down the corridor, his pulse quickened. The once comforting sound of his footsteps now felt louder, more intrusive, like a constant reminder of the line he was crossing. The air felt heavier, thicker. Every shadow seemed to loom larger, more menacing, as if the palace itself was alive and watching. His eyes flicked from one side to the other, searching the darkness for signs of movement, his senses heightened. But there was nothing. Just the stillness of a palace that had once been full of life, now hushed and empty. The garden corridor, which Thomas had walked through countless times before, was strangely quiet. The faint glow of emergency lighting illuminated the floor in weak pools of yellow, casting long shadows across the walls. Autumn leaves had found their way inside through the cracks in the windows, their fragile forms scattering across the cold tiles like forgotten remnants of another season. It was as if the outside world, with its crisp air and falling leaves, had seeped in, leaving its mark inside this otherwise sterile space. And then at the far end of the corridor, just beyond the turn where the path split toward the old greenhouse, Thomas saw him, Prince Louis. Alone, the child was standing still, his small frame barely visible in the dim light. His pajamas, adorned with tiny dinosaurs, clung to his slender body, but there was nothing playful about the way he stood. His face was pale, eyes wide with confusion and fear. His small hands were pressed tightly together, his fingers trembling slightly. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas called out softly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Are you all right?" The boy turned quickly, and the moment their eyes met, relief washed over his face. But before Thomas could take another step, before he could reach out to him, everything changed. Suddenly the lights went out. All at once, every single light, from the emergency lights to the overhead fixtures, plunged them into complete darkness. The sharp, cold absence of light was suffocating. Thomas's heart skipped a beat, his breath caught in his throat. He had lived through power failures, of course, but never like this. Never in the heart of Kensington Palace, not with everything going dark all at once. And then he heard it, a scream that froze him in his tracks. The unmistakable sound of Prince Louis's voice, filled with terror. It was a sound that would haunt him forever. Without thinking, without a moment of hesitation, Thomas's hand found the flashlight on his belt. He thumbed the switch and the beam sliced through the darkness. He could hear his boots pounding against the stone floor as he ran, the sound echoing loudly in the empty hallway. His heart was racing. His mind was frantic. All that mattered was finding Louis. He had to find the boy. "I'm coming, stay where you are." His voice cracked through the stillness, louder than he intended, but he didn't care. He just had to get to him. Each step felt like it took forever, the flashlight beam bobbing wildly in front of him, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Finally, he saw him. Louis was pressed against the far wall, his small body rigid with fear. Tears streamed down his pale cheeks, glistening in the weak light of Thomas's flashlight. The boy was trembling, his small form vulnerable and alone in the pitch-black darkness. His dinosaur pajamas, once a source of comfort, now seemed absurdly inadequate in the vast emptiness around them. Thomas dropped to one knee beside him, trying to keep the beam from blinding the boy. Hey, you're safe, I'm right here, you're okay," he said, his voice low and soothing. He could feel the fear radiating off Louis, could see the terror in his wide eyes. "The lights," the boy whispered. They all went away." "It's just a power issue," Thomas reassured him, though a sick feeling was growing in his stomach. "It's nothing to worry about, we'll get it fixed in no time." But even as words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. Power failures didn't happen like this at Kensington Palace, not with everything going dark all at once. This wasn't a coincidence, this was something more. Thomas pressed the button on his radio, but all he got was a burst of static. Then nothing. The radio was dead. His heart sank, panic gnawed at the edges of his mind. Something was very wrong. Louis's voice broke through his thoughts. "Can we go back now?" the boy asked, his voice small and trembling yet hopeful. "I want to find my mom." Thomas nodded quickly. "Of course, we'll get you back to your family." He extended his hand to the boy, but Louis didn't take it. Instead, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to hold back more tears. "I was looking for Paddington," Louis said, his voice shaky. "I thought I left him in the reading room, but he wasn't there, so I kept looking and I got lost." Before Thomas could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted him, fast, heavy, and echoing from deep within the corridor. Multiple pairs of boots moving in urgent rhythm. Thomas's instincts kicked in. He stepped in front of Louis, shielding the child with his body as he reached for the emergency alarm on his belt. But without power, would the alarm even work? Then, out of the darkness, a voice called out, "Guard Bennett, is that you?" Relief flooded through Thomas like a wave. "Yes, sir," he called back, his voice tinged with the exhaustion of relief. "I have Prince Louis here, he's safe." Two flashlight beams appeared, cutting through the darkness. Senior Officer Matthews emerged, his expression grim but filled with relief. Another guard followed closely behind him, both men breathing heavily, clearly having been searching frantically. "Thank God," Matthews said, his voice softening as he looked down at Louis. "We've been searching everywhere for you." Matthews's gaze shifted to Thomas. "Bennett, what happened? Why did you leave your post?" The question hung in the air like a shadow, and Thomas felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had broken the protocol. It didn't matter that Louis was safe. It didn't matter that he had acted on instinct to protect the child. He had left his post. That was a serious breach, one that could have consequences. "I heard His Royal Highness calling out, sir," Thomas said, standing a little straighter. "He was alone in a restricted area. I made the judgment call that his immediate safety was more important than protocol." Matthew studied him carefully. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Matthews gave a slight nod. "Right now, we have bigger things to worry about," he said. "The entire palace is dark. The backup generators have failed. We're evacuating the family to a secure location until we know what's going on." The weight of Matthews's words settled over them like a storm cloud. Secure location. That wasn't a phrase used lightly. That meant threat assessment. That meant danger. Thomas's breath came in quick bursts, each exhale more frantic than the last. The weight of the darkness seemed to press in on him from all sides, closing him off from the world he knew, leaving him with only his instincts to guide him. He had been trained for this moment, trained for any situation that might arise. But in that moment, nothing had prepared him for the fear he felt as he ran blindly through the pitch-black palace, his only guide the weak beam of his flashlight and the distant, frantic gasps of the child. The walls of the corridor seemed to shift with each step, stretching out into an endless, suffocating void. The flickering beam of light illuminated the rough stone, casting long shadows that danced like dark specters, adding to the growing sense of unease in his gut. His boots, once a steady rhythm, now seemed to pound louder, echoing off the walls and filling the silence with a deafening sound that threatened to drown him. "Stay where you are," he called out again, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the anxiety that had taken hold of him. It was all he could manage. His legs were burning, his heart racing in his chest as the sound of Louis's distress guided him forward. "I'm coming, Your Highness, I'm right here." Finally, the beam of his flashlight landed on the small figure ahead. Louis was pressed against the far wall of the corridor, his little body frozen in place, his small hands still tightly clenched in front of him. His eyes, wide with terror, shone in the dim light, tears streaking down his face. The boy looked impossibly small in the vast emptiness of the darkened corridor. The soft, comforting fabric of his dinosaur pajamas, so familiar, so innocent, seemed like the last vestige of safety in a world that had suddenly become all too dangerous. He looked lost, alone, abandoned. Louis didn't move at first. His small body quivered in the silence, every muscle frozen in place as he waited for someone to find him, to make the terrifying dark disappear. Thomas's heart broke at the sight of him, so small, so vulnerable. "Hey, Louis," he said softly, trying to steady his racing heart. He lowered himself to the boy's level, his flashlight gently illuminating the floor between them, the last flicker of warmth in an otherwise freezing world. "You're okay, you're safe now." The boy's wide eyes flickered up at him, a mix of fear and confusion in them. It took a moment for Louis to process the sound of Thomas's voice, to recognize the comfort in it. When he did, his face lit up with a flash of relief. But before he could speak, before he could express his gratitude, something happened that made everything unravel. The entire palace seemed to hold its breath, and then nothing. The lights went out, every light, every single one. The emergency lighting, the overhead fixtures, the security lights, everything. The vast, sprawling halls of Kensington Palace were now engulfed in an impenetrable darkness. A darkness so thick it felt like a tangible force pressing in on them from every side. It was suffocating. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what was happening. In the blink of an eye, the palace that he had come to know so well, that he had sworn to protect, had become a different place. A dangerous, unfamiliar place. The air seemed to grow colder. The walls of the corridor loomed larger. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him, choking him. And then the scream came. The unmistakable scream of Prince Louis. It was high-pitched, full of terror, and it cut through the stillness of the dark like a knife. It reverberated in Thomas's chest, making his heart skip a beat, and he immediately sprang into action. His hand reached instinctively for the flashlight at his belt. He thumbed the switch, the beam cutting through the darkness, creating a small island of light in the vast black sea around him. But the beam was weak, erratic, barely enough to guide him through the disorienting void. His boots hit the stone floor with urgent thuds, each step more frantic than the last. "Louis, stay where you are," he shouted again, his voice loud, desperate. He didn't care how it sounded now. All that mattered was getting to the boy. The flashlight beam swerved wildly as he moved, illuminating the walls in brief flashes. The light barely penetrated the suffocating darkness, and it was hard to make out anything more than the faintest shapes and shadows ahead of him. The only sounds he could hear were the rapid pounding of his own heart, his boots thudding against the floor, and Louis's ragged breaths echoing through the dark. Finally, the flashlight beam landed on Louis again. The boy was pressed against the wall, his small body rigid with fear. His eyes, wide and filled with terror, were locked onto the light, his small form shaking uncontrollably. He was standing so still, it almost looked like he was frozen in place, unable to move. Tears streamed down Louis's cheeks, glistening in the faint light from the flashlight. He was small, so small, surrounded by the immense, oppressive darkness. His tiny, dinosaur-covered pajamas seemed to shrink under the weight of it all, making him appear even more vulnerable. And yet, despite the fear, despite the confusion, there was something about Louis's expression that caught Thomas off guard. It wasn't just fear, it was a plea. A silent cry for help, for reassurance, for someone to make the darkness go away. Thomas didn't hesitate, his instincts kicked in. Dropping to one knee, he kept the flashlight low so it wouldn't blind the boy. He gently placed a hand on Louis's trembling shoulder, speaking softly but firmly. "You're safe now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "You're okay, you're not alone anymore." Louis's body was still shaking, but his eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, began to soften just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Thomas to see. He could see the smallest flicker of hope in the boy's gaze, and for a moment the world didn't feel so cold, so suffocating. The child, so small, so fragile, was looking up at him now, trusting him. That trust was something Thomas would carry with him for the rest of his life. Thomas remained kneeling beside Louis, his presence a steady anchor in the overwhelming darkness. The boy's small body trembled with fear, his breath coming in ragged, anxious bursts. The tight knot in Thomas's stomach refused to loosen. He gently directed the beam of his flashlight away from Louis's face, careful not to blind him in the unnerving gloom. He wanted to reassure him, to make him feel safe, even though the chaos unfolding around them made that impossible. Hey, you're safe," Thomas said softly, his voice low and comforting. "I'm right here, you're okay." He could see the boy's eyes, wide with confusion and fright, the tears still tracking down his cheeks. Louis's fear was palpable, and though he tried to hold himself together, his small body was shaking uncontrollably. "The lights," Louis whispered, his voice trembling. They all went away." Thomas nodded, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "It's just a power issue," he said, keeping his voice calm, masking the rising panic within. He tried to offer a smile, but it felt hollow. "Probably just a glitch, nothing to worry about. We'll get it fixed in no time." But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense of unease. Power failures were uncommon here, at least not like this, not all at once, not this completely. This wasn't a simple malfunction, and every instinct in him screamed that something was very wrong. Thomas quickly reached for his radio, his fingers brushing the familiar buttons out of reflex. He pressed it once again, hoping to hear the static that would precede the voice of another officer, a senior guard, anyone who could explain what was happening. But instead, the silence that greeted him was profound. The radio was dead. A cold fear wrapped around his chest. Something wasn't right. The quiet in the corridor felt unnatural, as if the palace itself had grown still, holding its breath. The lights were out, the radio was useless, and there was no way of knowing what had caused it all. His thoughts began to race as he looked down at Louis, still trembling in the dark. The boy was so small, so fragile in the vast emptiness of the corridor. "Can we go back now?" Louis's voice broke through his thoughts, small and fragile, filled with hope. "I want to find my mom." Thomas nodded quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Of course, let's get you back to your family." He extended his hand toward Louis, but the boy didn't take it. Instead, Louis wiped at his tear-streaked face with the back of his hand, his little shoulders shaking with every breath. He looked up at Thomas with a mixture of uncertainty and trust. Louis's words were soft but weighed down with worry. "Can you tell me how you ended up here?" Thomas asked, trying to comfort him, to ease the fear that was still so evident in the boy's eyes. Louis sniffled again, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his pajama top. His voice was barely above a whisper as he spoke, full of the uncertainty that all children have when they find themselves in unfamiliar places. "I was looking for Paddington," he said, the words shaky. I thought I left him in the reading room, but he wasn't there, so I kept looking, but I got lost. Thomas's heart twisted as he listened to the boy. He knew how easy it was to get lost in the grand halls of Kensington Palace, especially for a child. The rooms and corridors, all so vast and interconnected, could easily confuse anyone, let alone a small boy searching for a beloved stuffed bear. Before Thomas could offer any words of comfort, a sound sliced through the silence. Footsteps. Fast, urgent, their rhythm unmistakable. More than one pair, several people running, moving quickly down the corridor toward them. Instinctively, Thomas stood, his body tensing, positioning himself between the approaching noise and Louis. His free hand hovered near his belt, searching for the emergency alarm that could signal for backup. But with the power down, would it even work? Would anyone hear it? The footsteps grew louder, and then from the shadows, a voice called out sharply, "Guard Bennett, is that you?" The voice, authoritative and familiar, brought a rush of relief to Thomas. Senior Officer Matthews. "Yes, sir," Thomas responded quickly, his voice carrying across the dark corridor, the relief flooding through him like a burst of warmth. "I have Prince Louis here, he's safe." Moments later, two flashlight beams appeared from the darkness, bobbing as they moved toward them. Senior Officer Matthews emerged from the shadows, followed by another guard. Both men were breathing heavily, clearly having been running, searching. Matthews's face softened when he saw Louis, and the harsh lines of worry and urgency on his face eased into something gentler. "Thank God," Matthews muttered under his breath, his voice full of relief. "We've been searching everywhere for you." His gaze moved to Louis, and the boy looked up at him, his eyes still filled with tears. Louis's expression faltered for a moment, and he tried to be brave despite the terror still evident in his face. He looked up at Matthews, his voice small, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," Louis whispered. "I didn't mean to worry anyone." Matthews's eyes softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't need to apologize, Your Highness," he said gently, his voice full of warmth. "You've done nothing wrong." As Matthews shifted his gaze back to Thomas, his expression turned serious. "Bennett, what happened?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of protocol. "Why did you leave your post?" The question, though straightforward, hung in the air, carrying the weight of the rules that had been broken. Thomas felt the weight of Matthews's gaze, and for a moment his chest tightened. He had done what he believed was right, but breaking protocol was not something taken lightly, no matter the reason. "I heard His Royal Highness calling out," Thomas explained, standing a little taller as he met Matthews's gaze. "He was alone in a restricted area. I made the judgment call that his immediate safety was more important than standing by the rules." Matthews didn't speak immediately. He stood there, observing Thomas carefully. Finally, he nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. "Right now, we have bigger things to worry about," he said, his voice steady, but the undertone of urgency was clear. "The entire palace is dark. The backup generators have failed. We're evacuating the family to a secure location until we know what's going on." The words settled heavily on Thomas's shoulders. Secure location. That wasn't just a precaution. That wasn't just a drill. That was an acknowledgement that something serious was happening, something that could pose a real threat to the royal family. "I know you didn't," Matthews reassured him gently, his voice a soft contrast to the tension that hung thick in the air. But then his tone shifted, becoming more measured, more authoritative. "Bennett, what happened? Why did you leave your post?" The question was direct, but it carried an undeniable weight, laden with the unspoken implications of what Thomas had done. Breaking protocol was not a small matter, especially in a place as secure as Kensington Palace. And even though Thomas knew he had acted with the best intentions, the weight of Matthews's gaze felt like it could crush him. Thomas straightened his back, lifting his chin. His posture was rigid, disciplined, the way he had been trained to stand. But despite the outward appearance of composure, his insides churned. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming. The rules were clear: never leave your post, never break protocol. And yet in that single moment, Thomas had made a choice that went against everything he had been taught. But even now, as Matthews scrutinized him, Thomas didn't regret it. His instincts had taken over. He had done what needed to be done, and he knew deep down it was the right decision. "I heard His Royal Highness calling out," Thomas explained, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment threatened to crack his composure. "He was alone in a restricted area. I made the judgment call. I thought his immediate safety was the priority." His eyes met Matthews's, unwavering, but his heart hammered in his chest. There was no denying it. He had abandoned his post, but he had done it for the sake of the child. Matthews didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Thomas for what felt like an eternity, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Matthews gave a slight nod, his features softening just a fraction. "Right now, we have bigger things to worry about," he said, his voice returning to its usual command. "The entire palace is dark. The backup generators failed. We are evacuating the family to a secure location until we know what's going on. Those words settled into the air like a storm cloud hanging over them both. Secure location. It wasn't just a precaution, it wasn't just a measure of safety. No, when Matthew said those words, it carried the unmistakable tone of urgency. A secure location meant threat assessment. It meant something was happening, something far more dangerous than a simple power outage. It meant they were preparing for a situation that could escalate, something that could shake the very foundations of the palace's security. Something worse than just a technical failure. Matthews continued, his voice firm and controlled. We don't know yet, but we're not taking any chances. His eyes were hard, his expression resolute. The power was down, the palace was dark, and everything about the situation screamed that this was no ordinary malfunction. This was something more. Thomas nodded, his stomach tightening. His mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening. The tension in the air was palpable, suffocating. It felt like the very walls of Kensington Palace were closing in, like the shadows themselves were shifting, moving with an unsettling purpose. Something was out of place, and whatever it was only just beginning. And so Thomas broke protocol, following his instincts to protect the young prince in the darkness. But what happened next will leave you questioning everything. Power failures, locked corridors, and a child lost in the dark. What danger was truly lurking within the palace walls? If you want to know what happens next and how Thomas's split-second decision changed everything, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the rest of this gripping story. Stay tuned for the next chapter and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Thomas's shoes? Could you break protocol or would you stick to the rules? Let's keep the conversation going.